This happened a few years ago. As the new year approaches, the city turns into something strange. Everyone seems excited, but at the same time, a little aggressive. In that crowd, I had only one thought. This year, I don't want to hear anything. When I talked to Jason about it, he said he felt the same way. Jason had been my closest friend since college. Let's get away from the crowded celebrations, he said. 2 days, just 2 days, in the woods, an old cabin, a fireplace, some beer, a stupid horror movie, then we come back. At the time, I liked the idea. We rented a cabin through Airbnb. It looked good in the photos. The plan was simple. I would take time off work and go a day early. Jason would arrive the next afternoon. 2 days before New Year's Eve, I left in the afternoon. The last turn toward the cabin was easy to miss. Snow had covered the road in a single, unbroken white. I slowed down and turned in. By the time the cabin appeared between the trees, it was almost dark. Inside, it was obvious the place hadn't been used in a long time. Old wood, cold stone, the smell of a house that had been shut for too long. I didn't stay up late that night. Before going to bed, I checked the doors and windows. The bedroom was upstairs. As I slipped under the covers, the weight of the day finally lifted. As my eyes closed, I heard the faint sound of wind outside. Then everything went dark. I don't know how long I slept. I woke up suddenly. For the first few seconds, I just listened. There was a sound coming from downstairs, slow footsteps, heavy, dull creaks on the wooden floor. Not steady, irregular. One step forward, a pause, then a step to the side, as if someone was wandering around the living room without really going anywhere. I didn't panic at first. My initial thought was simple. Jason. In our last conversation, he had said, "Maybe I'll head out tonight. I might be back before noon tomorrow, depending on how things go." "At this hour?" I whispered. I didn't call out. I didn't get out of bed. The footsteps continued for a while. Then they stopped. The cabin fell silent again. "Okay," I told myself. "It's fine." Morning came with a pale, frosty light. The cabin was still wrapped in that deep winter silence. When I went downstairs, the lower floor was empty. I checked the front door. The bolt wasn't fully engaged. It had been pulled down, but not locked into place. Stuck halfway. "It's my own absent-mindedness," I said. "I must not have pushed it all the way last night." It was easy to say, harder to believe. I grabbed my phone and texted Jason. "Did you come last night?" I heard something. The reply came immediately. "I'm still in the city. I'll leave tomorrow afternoon." I stared at the screen, then read it again. No. The footsteps I heard weren't Jason's. I looked around the cabin, an empty living room, cold stone floor, a faint rattle from the wood basket. "Old house," I muttered. "Wood expands." It was probably the wind, but the explanation didn't calm me. Outside, it started snowing again. Light at first. The forest road faded into a gray line, the trees growing darker around it. I didn't go outside all day. I had the strange feeling that if I opened the door, something more than cold would come in. I checked the window now and then. Nothing moved. There was no cell service. Sometimes a single bar would appear, then vanish. By late afternoon, I forced myself to be rational. I checked every door and window one by one. I deliberately turned each lock. I pushed the front door bolt. This time, it clicked clearly into place. Still, the unease didn't fade, because the problem wasn't the lock. It was the footsteps. Heavy, irregular, human, but not wandering. It felt more like checking. Night fell. The snowfall grew heavier. The wind picked up. I lit the fireplace. Flames danced across the walls. Everything looked normal. That was what disturbed me the most. I went upstairs and got into bed. I kept my phone and a flashlight beside me. "You're overreacting," I whispered. "Jason will be here tomorrow." I turned off the lights. Nothing happened for a long time. Just as I was drifting off, I heard a creak downstairs. Then a step, then another. Footsteps moved back and forth across the lower floor, between the kitchen and the front door. Forward. Stop. Back again, as if someone was checking the door, glancing into the kitchen, then returning to the door. I held my breath. I turned on my phone screen. No signal. The footsteps didn't stop. I grabbed the flashlight and stood at the top of the stairs, listening to the heavy steps below. My heart was pounding. Then I realized the footsteps had stopped in front of the door. When I stepped onto the first stair, the wood creaked softly. The sound felt impossibly loud. At the same moment, I heard movement below. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the only one listening. Someone was listening to me. I still hadn't turned on the flashlight. The lower floor was barely visible in the faint orange glow of dying embers from the fireplace. I took one more step down. There was no hiding now. The person below, I wasn't calling it something anymore, knew I was there. I turned on the flashlight. The beam hit the floor first, then the sofa, the kitchen counter. Everything was exactly where it should be. Too normal. I slowly moved the light toward the front door. The man was standing right there, inside the cabin. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. He was looking straight at me. When the light hit his face, he didn't flinch. He didn't turn away. His beard was unkempt. His face looked tired. But that wasn't what terrified me. There was no expression, no surprise, no fear, no anger, just a blank stare. I stared back. I froze on the stairs, gripping the flashlight. One thought filled my mind. If this silence lasts any longer, something bad will happen. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. There were only a few steps between us. Then, slowly, the man stepped back. No rush, no sudden movement. Without breaking eye contact, he took another step back and reached for the door handle. He opened the door quietly. He stepped outside, but didn't leave right away. He paused in the doorway and looked at me one last time. That was when I was truly afraid. There was no threat in his eyes, no anger. It felt like he was measuring me, judging my strength, my loneliness, how defenseless I was. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. He didn't have to leave. He chose to leave. The man didn't close the door. He simply walked away, fading into the darkness. I heard a few footsteps crunching in the snow, then silence. I closed the door, locked it, pushed the bolt. Only then did I notice my hands were shaking. I stood there for a long time. I stayed downstairs until morning. The fire died out. The cabin grew cold. The wind rattled the door now and then, but it never opened. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. At dawn, I went outside. Fresh snow covered everything. Large boot prints stood in front of the door. The tracks led away from the cabin onto the forest path and disappeared into the trees. He hadn't wandered. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't stopped. He came. He went inside. Then he left. Jason arrived that afternoon. The sound of his car felt painfully loud. I told him everything. "We're not staying here," he said. I didn't argue. We packed our things and drove away. As we left the forest road, I glanced at the cabin in the rearview mirror. It stood quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew. What frightened me most wasn't that the man came inside. It was that he looked at me and decided to leave. Because I knew, if he had decided to stay, there was nothing I could have done to stop him. I was 25 when this happened. Traveling during Christmas week isn't something people usually do. Most try to stay home, especially around those days. But I was going to spend New Year's with my family, so I didn't postpone the trip. That year, it had to be that way. I left in the late afternoon. The weather was dry and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that belongs to winter. The radio kept repeating the same warnings: strong winds, snowstorms in some areas. The road was less crowded than I expected. With Christmas just days away, it felt like everyone had already arrived. Aside from a few cars, the highway was almost completely empty. Inside the car, it was warm. My coffee sat in a travel mug. My phone was plugged in and charging. The navigation screen showed one clear number: 9 hours and 48 minutes. It was a long drive, but I was used to long drives alone. Still, as the night stretched on, especially once the road entered the forest, my mind drifted. Even the smallest sounds felt unusually sharp. As midnight approached, I thought I might have missed a sign on the main highway. I instinctively glanced to the right. At that exact moment, the navigation screen went black for a second, then turned back on. "Alternative route found!" A thin blue line appeared on the screen. It branched off the main road and disappeared into the darkness. The route cut straight through the forest. No signs, no lights. Normally, I wouldn't trust a road like that. But fatigue, the cold, and the desire to arrive as soon as possible won out. The road was empty anyway. I turned the steering wheel. For nearly an hour, I drove without seeing another car. No headlights coming toward me. No red taillights ahead. Just snow, road markings, and the narrow beam of my headlights cutting through the dark. Fatigue does strange things to your mind. Even when nothing is wrong, it plants the feeling that something is about to happen. After a while, you start doubting your own thoughts more than anything else. That's when I saw a small sign on the right. Rest area. It wasn't large, but seeing lights at that hour felt reassuring. A short break sounded like a good idea, just enough to clear my head. I pulled in. The tire tracks in the snow immediately caught my attention. There was one clear set of tracks leading in, and near the edge, a patch of crushed snow, as if another vehicle had parked there. But there was no car. "That's normal," I told myself. "It must have just left." I parked near the light. Everything was quiet. The restroom door was half open. Inside, the light was on, but no one was there. Old warning signs on the walls, slippery floor, "Please close the door." Normal things. Still, something felt off. There was no sound of a human voice. Not even the sense that someone could be there. As I walked back toward my car, something caught my eye. Someone was standing by the rear door. I froze. When I had stepped out of the car, the place was empty. I hadn't looked away, not even for a moment. And yet now, he was there. He wore a thick coat, a hood, maybe a beret. His face was just beyond the reach of the light. His hands were in his pockets, and he was looking into my car through the window. "Hey," I called out. "Do you need help?" He didn't answer. He only turned his head slightly, just enough for me to know he'd heard me. Then he slowly stepped back. Not like someone fleeing, more like someone who had already decided to leave. He walked into the darkness. I stood there for a moment. My heart was racing, but it wasn't panic. It was something colder, like my mind sounding an alarm, telling me to find logic. I got into the car, locked the doors, started the engine, and turned on the heater. It wasn't safer inside, just warmer. I drove away. After a short while, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. At first, I relaxed. "Finally," I said out loud. Someone else on the road. But the distance of the headlights was wrong. They weren't getting closer. They weren't falling back. I slowed down. They slowed down too. I sped up. They sped up. The word coincidence couldn't find a place to settle in my mind. I turned right. They turned right as well. I was being followed. At the wheel, I forced myself to breathe deeply. "Okay," I told myself. "Stay calm. Think logically. Panic is the worst mistake on roads like this. Speed up, and you risk losing control. Stop, and you become vulnerable." So I kept driving at a steady pace. After a while, a large open area appeared on the right side of the road. It looked like a small road maintenance facility, a fenced courtyard, a few parked vehicles. Without thinking, I signaled and turned in. I stopped under the light, directly in front of the building. I left the engine running. One hand stayed on the gear shift. I waited. My heartbeat was loud enough to blend with the sound of the engine. A few seconds passed. Then, headlights appeared. The same headlights. They turned in after me and stopped near the garage. No doors opened. No one got out. The lights pointed straight at my car. I couldn't see inside. I didn't know how many people were there, or who they were. Time stretched. 1 second felt like 5. I reached for my phone. No service. You don't have to stay, I whispered to myself. You can leave whenever you want. Suddenly, the headlights turned off. The car slowly backed away. The tires crunched softly on the snow. Then it turned around and drove back into the darkness, the way it had come. I watched until it disappeared. I stayed there for a moment longer, hollow inside. Was it a trick? I wondered. Just to scare me? I got back on the road, gripping the steering wheel tighter. About 20 minutes later, I heard a strange sound from the back of the car. At first, I thought it was a tire brushing against ice or debris. Then it happened again. A faint, metallic clunk. I slowed down. The sound faded. I sped up. It returned. This sound didn't belong to the car. When I reached a well-lit intersection, I stopped. I got out, crouched behind the car, and turned on my phone's flashlight. Inside the rear wheel, well, something was stuck in the mud. A small black object. Round. About the size of my palm. It was attached to the metal with a magnet. I pulled it free. In that moment, the last possibility of coincidence disappeared. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew someone had placed it there deliberately, quickly, on purpose. I got back in the car and drove straight to the nearest lit area, a small town entrance. My phone regained signal. The first thing I did was call the police. A patrol car arrived soon after. They inspected the vehicle. One of them picked up the device. This is a GPS tracking device, he said. Most likely placed at the rest stop. The rest stop. They said they would check both the rest area and the road facility. A while later, one of the officers returned. He didn't have a report in his hand, but his expression had changed. At that rest area, he said, there's usually a night shift attendant. But no one's heard from him in a few days. He hesitated, then added, there's no clear image of the person you described on the cameras. A strange emptiness settled inside me. I canceled the trip. I called my family and made an excuse. Then I turned back. Since that night, I don't stop at rest areas on long drives. And if I do stop, I don't get out of the car. And when I look in the rearview mirror now, I don't look at the headlights behind me the way I used to. I experienced this 3 years ago. Christmas Eve is not a night meant for the word alone. It usually belongs to families. The sound of people moving through the house, warm smells drifting from the kitchen, tree lights glowing quietly in the corner. That wasn't my night. That year, I left the city under the excuse of work, or maybe just to clear my head. The area felt unfinished, like it had been abandoned halfway through becoming a neighborhood. Houses were scattered, streetlights rare. To reach the main road, you had to drive through long, narrow lanes. Most neighbors had left for the holidays. Even during the day, the place felt empty. That afternoon, the sky was gray. There was no snow yet, but it felt close, like it could start at any moment. I put the ready-made meals I'd bought at the market on the counter. To give the house at least a hint of Christmas, I turned on the small artificial tree in the corner of the living room. The tiny lights usually tell a story. That night, they just flickered, as if saying, I'm here. I turned on a classic Christmas movie. I don't remember what time it was when things began to feel strange. As the wind outside grew louder, time stopped feeling linear. Sometimes it was snow hitting the windows. Sometimes the roof creaked. the familiar winter sounds of an old house. But one sound didn't belong. It came from the side of the house, short, indistinct, as if a pile of snow had shifted, or the wind had nudged a trash bin. At first, I ignored it. I lowered the volume on the TV and listened. Silence returned, the long exhale of the wind, a distant hum from somewhere far away. Normal sounds. Then, a few minutes later, it happened again. This time, it came from a different spot, closer. I remember gripping the remote a little tighter. When you're alone, your mind moves back and forth between logic and instinct. In that moment, instinct began to win. I stood up and pulled the curtain back slightly. Outside was pure white. Snow swirled sideways, limiting visibility to just a few meters. I saw no one. I sat back down and tried to keep watching the movie. That's when I heard metal clink softly at the front door. The handle wasn't turning. The door wasn't being forced. It sounded like someone lightly touching the metal from the outside, carefully, deliberately, as if checking, "Is there a lock here?" I froze. Within moments, the house felt like a sealed, dark box. I didn't even want to hear my own voice. I picked up my phone and hid it in my palm so the screen wouldn't light my face. The signal was already weak. I waited. Then movement began outside. Slow footsteps in the snow. Not clear, there was wind, but the rhythm was wrong. Wind scatters sound randomly. These steps were controlled. Walk, stop, listen, walk again. There was a brief pause in front of the living room window. I didn't see anyone trying to peer inside, but I felt someone standing there. Sometimes you don't understand these things with your eyes, but with your body. Your neck tightens. Your shoulders rise. The air inside the house changes. Then the footsteps moved on. Another window. This time I saw a shadow. Maybe just snow swirling. Or maybe someone. I couldn't be sure. I forced myself not to react. Anything could give me away. A cough. A movement. The glow of my phone. Any sign that someone was inside. But worse, any sign that I was alone. The line between those two truths felt razor thin. After a while, the footsteps moved to the back of the house. The back door. The narrow exit from the kitchen, opening onto a small porch. When it snowed, the steps there disappeared quickly. I knew I had locked that door. I could still hear the click of the lock in my memory. And yet, in that silence, even memories begin to feel unreliable. Then I heard metal scraping. Something outside was moving near the lock. Not fingernails, too hard. Not a key, too rough. It sounded like someone testing the door, feeling for weakness, then pressure. The door didn't open, but the frame creaked, old wood groaning softly, as if saying, "I'm still here." Then came short, controlled impacts. Not fists, not kicks. Calculated. That's when I knew this wasn't someone at the wrong house. This was someone checking whether a house was empty or occupied. And that night, my house was being tested. I called the police. About 10 minutes later, I heard a siren in the distance. At first it was faint, just a thin sound mixed with the wind. Then it grew clearer, and as it did, everything outside the house stopped. The pressure on the door vanished. The metallic sounds ended abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch. It felt as if no one had ever been there at all, as if the entire thing had existed only in my mind. But the doorframe was still strained, and I still couldn't breathe. As the siren drew closer, the silence inside the house became heavier. All I could hear was my heartbeat and the wind moving through the empty night. I jumped when the doorbell rang. A normal sound, yet impossibly loud in that moment. I walked to the door, hearing my own footsteps. I kept the chain on and opened it just a few inches. 2 police officers stood outside. Snow clung to their faces. Their coats were wet. Their breath fogged the air. "Are you okay?" one asked. I nodded. Words took a moment to come. They looked inside and asked me to turn on the lights. When the living room brightened, the house felt unfamiliar, even to me. Like someone had passed through it, touching everything, without moving a thing. We checked the back door. The wood was cracked near the lock. Not broken, but damaged. Enough to show that someone had applied force. The door had been tested. Outside, we found footprints. They circled the house, especially around the back door. Not random, purposeful. But as the snowfall continued, the tracks were slowly disappearing. One officer shined a flashlight, while the other shook his head. "This isn't random," he said. He was checking if the house was empty or occupied. "Will he come back?" I asked. He shrugged. After the sirens faded, the house fell silent again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a chair with the lights on. I checked the doors again and again. I wedged a chair against the back door. It didn't make sense, but it helped. Outside, the storm erased everything. The footprints, the proof. Since that night, Christmas Eve has meant something different to me. Not family, not movies, just the image of someone slowly walking around my house in the snow. Because if the sirens had arrived just a few minutes later, this story might have ended very differently.